Hey, hello everyone. We are here with Jessica for the first ever talk of today after the keynote speech. So she will talk about practical tips to improve your UX and accessibility. And without further ado, you have the stage, Jessica.
Thank you. And I will share my screen so you can actually see what I see. There we go. Hi, welcome. And thank you for joining my session about UX and accessibility. But I'm actually going to start with a joke. Granted, it's a little bit old joke and probably a bad one, but it's still a joke. So there's this person who goes to the doctor and they ask the doctor, so my shoulder hurts every time I move my arm like this. And the doctor's response? Stop moving it like that. Which is basically how Apple responded to the people who complained about the signal degradation on their iPhone 4. If you cover the bottom left corner of the phone, you could get dropped calls and get reduced bandwidth. One person, allegedly, sent an email to Apple that Engadget published, and take a look at the bottom. Just avoid holding it in that way. To even suggest that this is the user's fault, that's just horrible. But it makes me think of a principle. The principle of least astonishment. If a necessary feature has a high astonishment factor, it may be necessary to redesign that feature. Meaning that things, applications, webs, and so on needs to behave in a way that the users expect, without surprises, regardless if it's super beautiful or not. My name is Jessica Engström, and I've been teaching UX for developers a little over a decade now. I am a developer technology MVP, and together with Jimmy, who you may or may not actually see later today, we run a podcast, stream, and organize developer events. So if you are into any of that, you're welcome to join us. We have a lot of fun. Today, I will give you 2 practical examples of how to improve your UX and the top 3 accessibility mistakes and how to fix them. But before we dive in there, I want to be clear and, well, rather I want to clear some things up. Some of the confusions and misconceptions about UI and UX. Because there is a lot of confusion and uncertainties. And some of you have probably seen similar images like I'm putting up the screen right now, where we have the classical glass bottle of ketchup, which is representing UI. And then we have the plastic squeezy bottle, which is representing UX. Or we have the example of before and after UX. You can't just add UX like it's some magic pixie dust. You can improve on it for sure, but I see it more like this. All of them is a UI. The same with the pretty designs they show before and after. And all of them has a UX, how we actually use the ketchup bottle. So what I'm trying to say here is both a good and a bad experience is equally much a UX, how we're using the bottle. And in many of those pictures, the plastic bottle, the squeezy ketchup bottle is in the after, like when it's good. But this person is having a different experience. It's still equally as much UX. I do like when we try to include everyone, so this is my absolute favorite ketchup package because it caters both to those who wants to dip their fries and to those who prefer to squeeze it all over. So kudos to them. As humans, we have limitations. Our sight is limited, our attention is limited, our memory is limited, just to name a few of our limitations. But designing with those limitations in mind will benefit our users greatly. They will perceive our applications as faster, easier, more intuitive, and many times even better looking. In psychology, there's something called cognitive load. And you can compare your brain or our brains to the processor of a computer. If you have several processes running at the same time, the computer will get slower and less responsive, like when you fire up one too many video editing programs or Visual Studio or something like that. And everything from distractions to conflicting information can pose an issue, or even having too much information for that matter that this poor cat is having right now. So if we overload the users with too many choices or too many unnecessary actions, we will derail the user train of thought, and we might even irritate them or make them slower and so on. And I will show you a real-world example of way too many unnecessary steps right at the end. Something that causes just frustration and also wastes money for companies. But first, let's look at this number. There's no way I will comprehend or remember a number like this. But if we break it up into chunks, it is so much easier to read, and it reduces that cognitive load. So in a way, credit and debit cards are a good example of reducing cognitive load. So maybe shopping does too? I don't know. Maybe not. The same is also true for our applications. So if we take a form as a more practical example, we have some data, we have some input boxes, just a regular form, nothing special. If we are putting the labels to the left of the input boxes, we get a total of 32 visual fixations. So that's 32 places where the users need to stop, focus, and read. Stop, focus, and read. We're also trained to read in a certain pattern. In the Western world, we read from left to right and top to bottom, so we get a lot of zigzagging going on. So first step is move the labels on top of the input boxes. Already here, we have almost half the number of visual fixations. We have now 18 instead of 32. There are other things we can improve, like don't blindly use a template because you used it last time, or your colleague used it, or you found a template. Really think about what you need to ask for at this moment. Is it really relevant data what gender I identify with when I sign up for a blog post site or a blog site? It is so much easier for the user and for us if we only ask for what we need. I will also remove age range because we can get that programmatically from date of birth, if in case age is of important. Same goes for marital status. I think that is kind of outdated to ask about nowadays. And while we're at it, let us change the date of birth to one input instead of 3 dropdowns like this. There is a caveat here though, which I will get back to in a minute. I have also simplified first and last name and put it into a full name input box like this. We still have a lot of zigzag going on, but of course we can just push them into one row now when we have the space. So let's do that. We have now reduced the amount of visual fixations by a lot. We are down to 9. And if you are a very observant person, you'll notice that I'm only showing 8 on the screen. And that is simply because it doesn't fit. So now we can think about if we really need to ask about the address upon registration, or if we can wait until we're actually shipping something. But let's say we need it. Let us split it up into 2 pages. Much easier to digest, like the numbers we chunked out. And honestly, If it were to fit in one page, we could still benefit from splitting it up. It's much less overwhelming to fill out a couple of small form pages than one humongous one. Okay, let's continue to make this better. To be upfront with the users on how much is left will lower anxiety and stress levels, even on a brain chemical level. So by showing a progress indicator, we not only will lower that and be more upfront, we will also encourage more people to complete the form. And as a side effect, the users will trust us just a little bit more because it's automatically feeling more honest. And this is my absolute favorite part. If we give the user a head start, like I have done here, before they even start on the progress, the number who actually fill in the form will increase significantly because we all want that achievement dopamine. Let us put the button right in the line of sight going down a straight line to the left, because as a bonus, we will also increase the accessibility for free. If we are putting it to the right and we are using some sort of screen enlargement tool, it is kind of hidden and hard to see that there actually is a button. So better safe than sorry. And while we're at the button, let's talk about what does continue really mean. Are we continuing with the sign up? Are we continuing with the next step? Are we continuing? What are we continuing with? Sometimes it's clear, but sometimes it's not. So I suggest that we always change it to something like in this case, next step that is much more clear to what it's actually going to happen. Honestly, in this case, since we are using a progress indicator, it would have been clear enough to use continue, but it never hurts to be overly clear. And I don't want to forget to change the buttons to something that makes sense. Helping users with smart defaults so the user doesn't have to think about how you want the data submitted is also very powerful. So if you look under date of birth here, you can see instead of date of birth, enter your date of birth, we instead show the actual format we want the user to put in. And here's the caveat I was mentioning earlier. If we want to have one single input box for dates like this one, and we don't have a date picker, be very clear as to what format you are expecting. This is especially helpful for international users or even local users that are on international pages for that matter. Because even if we can, to some extent, get the language or region that the operating system or application is set to, it doesn't have to be true. I'm one of those who have all my operating systems on English, but some of my devices have the region Sweden. So I'm messing things up there. So be overly clear. Letting the user know that they have succeeded is also very powerful. In this case, we are putting a green frame around the input box. However, to be more inclusive, we need to make sure that we are showing in other ways than color what's going on. So I'm putting a symbol here as well for those who struggle with colors. Another great tool is to mark the active input box and actually start to mark the first one even before the user starts to fill it in, because it's more inviting and it's very clear where to go. In our case, we are using a blue frame that is double the size of the original frame. So it is still visible for everyone, even if you don't see blue the same way. And display the errors before the user submits the form if you can, and preferably not in a long list on top or bottom. Let them know where the issue is. And again, to elevate our color accessibility, we put a symbol together with the color as well. Never blame the user by saying stuff like, you put in the wrong date. Be as clear as possible. Think for the user. Don't make them think why or how or struggle with having to think at all. So in our case, wrong format will inadvertently put some blame on the user. So let's change that to an error message that reflects on what we actually want. So now the user knows what we're asking for. So with just a few steps, we went from this to this. There's still a lot of things we can improve upon, but it's still a long way. And if you look at the second page or the right side of the screen, at the button, you will see that I have not used next step or continue here either. I'm using create your account, which is a little bit more on the nose what they're actually doing. This is so beneficial for the users, and which means we will actually get people to fill in the forms, which is beneficial for us. Other things we can improve upon can be always have an exit for the user so they can opt out at any time. Make sure that they can go back in the UI if they want to change something. Maybe they used the wrong email address and want to change it. And use a contrasting color for the input boxes. Like here, we are using white input boxes on a gray background. We all want the users to navigate through our interface with ease. So we need to design things in a way where we take advantage of the natural human cognitive processes. And this means we need to reduce interference. And anyone who have a cat knows that they interfere with the laptop every single time you put it up because they love it. If things are arranged in a way that we understand the hierarchy, we will lower that cognitive load because we don't have to think about it. It's already put out for us. You've probably seen examples like this before, where it is much easier to read the written color when it's colored in a neutral or a congruent color, as opposed to when you have an incongruent color randomly like this, we get that interference. We have a harder time to process it. I mean, we can read it, but it's definitely not as efficient. Here's another example of just that, interference. A lot of the Western world associate red with stop and green with go, which means we get a slight conflict. And I will tell you, I made this slide, and I still, for just a little millisecond, I read stop on the red side because I'm so used to that. Being in Sweden, I need to take you to IKEA in Stockholm. And I think they are doing a great job here. It's very clear that I'm supposed to go in through the green gates here, regardless if I can read that it says in or not. Now, these kinds of gates are getting more and more common, especially since the majority of shops have gotten self-checkout and stuff like that during the pandemic. And the shop themselves can decide on what they etch on the doors or gates, and they can change the color. So if you take your logo instead of the in a grocery chain, like this one in Sweden, which is a very large one, sounds great, right? Well, this is a kind of local shop to ours. I've been there probably 20, 30 times or so. But every single time I go there, I walk up to the gates and I think, right, this is the exit. And I take a step back. And then I realize, no, wait, it is the entry. So definitely a conflict in information. So by giving the users clear instructions and also clear error messages, it will make all the difference. I mean, we all make mistakes, stuff happens, and the users will mostly understand that, unless we put up an error message like this. The user will definitely wonder what to do. Should they just press OK? Should they unplug the machine? Should they throw it out? Should they call the emergency number? This error message is just scary. Or like this error message from a bank in Sweden. Not helpful in the least. We have the red warning triangle and null. What does that mean? Is my money gone? Hard to know. So let's talk about error messages and take the 404 page as an example. Research has found that poorly designed error messages triggers a physical stress response by raising our cortisol level, our stress hormone. How interesting is that? A physical reaction. So we can stress our users out if we are not careful. So let's look at what makes a good error message. Step 1, use plain language. Actually, I'm going to strike that for this particular example because they are sort of using plain language, but they're also using a bunch of technical jargon, which means for me as a user, I might not understand that. And that can make a user a little bit more scared or hesitant, or they just don't understand. A good error message is also actionable. And here we have no buttons, no URLs, not even a suggestion on what actions to take next. So depending on what your page or application does, we can do things like put in a search box, or we can put in a way to get back to the beginning in the start page, stuff like that. The message itself should also be short because having too much text to read can be a little bit overwhelming. So it doesn't help with the clarity if we have a long error message. And I will actually give it to this error message. It is short, so you get a point. Explain how to fix it, if it's fixable. In this example, we get a bunch of uncertainties. It might have been removed, it might have changed name, and it might be temporarily unavailable. And what does that mean? Will it come back? When? Sometimes, of course, we can't provide a solution, but we can give options. We can add buttons, URLs, and what have you to solve the issue or get around the issue. If we have a web shop, for instance, we can add images and URLs to popular items and stuff like that, which will feel very helpful for the user rather than that they made an oopsie. So it's a win-win situation. We sell more, they're happy. And I've said it before, and I will probably say it again, never, ever put blame on the user. Be humble about it. It's not the user's fault that we didn't cover 100% of the things that can go wrong. In this case, we are not directly blaming the users, but are not taking responsibilities either. Using words like error, something went wrong, failed, and so on will inadvertently put some blame on the user, and they will feel that they did something wrong, or at least that it was their fault. Same goes for the color red in this example as well. So let's look at a completely different example of the exact same thing. Here we are using plain language. It is actionable since we have provided URLs. It is short. I mean, what's not to understand about this? And we are giving a solution to the user. They can choose from a handful of URLs, and we are definitely not blaming the user. And it's okay to be funny or witty or true to your brand, but as long as you fulfill these 5 other steps. So 5 steps, we have elevated the error message quite a bit. And of course, this applies to all types of error messages, not just 404 pages. Being consistent and not reinventing the wheel, so to say, will help the user as well. Following platform and industry standards are important. The learnability will improve for the user, and it will feel so much easier and faster to use your application or web. What would you say this is? A leaf, right? At least I think it looks like a leaf. So if it was a button, what would it do? Well, this is a symbol from a learning management system that we use in one of the schools I teach at. This was create a new message. You press the leaf. Perhaps not the clearest symbol for that. And it took, we're talking seconds or milliseconds here, a couple of 100 milliseconds, but I still couldn't comprehend what it was, so it basically rendered it effectively invisible. The funny thing is that in all the rest of the system, they are using the pen, which is a more standardized way of creating a message. And to be fair to this learning management system, they did change it just recently. But for a year, that was a leaf. I think it might supposed to be a quill, or perhaps show that digital communication saves paper. I'm not sure. So the problem with create new is that we have more than one standard. Twitter uses both a plus sign and a quill. Outlook is using a pen. We have stars and documents, and the list goes on and on. And being this inconsistent will slow the users down. And again, we're probably talking about a few 100 milliseconds up to a second or something like that, but all those milliseconds adds up. So avoid using different symbols for something that already have been established. Now, issues with going too far outside of standards and conventions can also be found in the real world. Are you supposed to go to the bathroom here or wash your hands? For those who sits down doing their business, this makes no sense. And for those who usually stands up doing their business, it feels vaguely familiar and an accident might occur. And I say that because if we zoom in a little, if you actually have to put printed labels on each of these wash basins or bathroom sinks, if you will, I think there's been more than one mistake here. So if we have a clear standard and not stray too far outside of that, it will feel familiar. You probably recognize this traffic sign regardless if you live in Sweden or not. This is what it looks like in Great Britain. Not identical, pretty close. There's another example of a parking sign in Poland and Sweden. I understand where I can park and not. So this is what you want to strive for. Here's an example from an in-flight entertainment system. You start a game, and the pause button is up here to the right. Now I get bored of this game. I go and change the game on the same platform, same in-flight entertainment system, and suddenly the pause button is up here to the left, which I do not expect because it was on the right side, which also means that I can't find it. So I think that this game I can't pause this game. We are creatures of habit, so there is a high risk that nobody will see it if we keep moving things to unexpected areas. So don't let your UI elements wander around in your application or web. Like it or not, if there is a standard, stick to it. Hierarchy is important for many reasons. For example, it will reduce that cognitive load I mentioned earlier. And as humans, we do not read pages or apps, we scan them. And that makes hierarchy very important. We need to figure out what is the most important feature of your application and give that the loudest place. If that is a font or an image, it doesn't matter. What is the least important thing? Do we even need to have that on the screen at all times? And so on. So we need to ask ourselves those questions. Here's an example of not optimal hierarchy. What speaker is presenting what session? And it might not show very well on the screen, but there is a gray light gray line divider here. So I will darken that for you. More clear? No. So let's look at another more practical example. We have a page with a list of posts. So this is a blog with a bunch of blog posts. The first thing we can do is use proximity to make it easier for the user to see what heading is belonging to what preview text. So let's move that closer. And what is it that we want to show the users? We want them to look at a post and click it, right? So they can read it. So let's make the subheaders stand out a little bit more by either increasing them or reducing the font size. And it depends on the size you have. To begin with, for this example, I decreased the preview text because it's still large enough that you can read it, and also you're not supposed to read the whole blog post out here. So now when we have a little bit more room, we can afford to move the post down a little bit from the page header. And now well, I wonder, how else can we show hierarchy? Well, all posts might not be of the same importance. We might sort them on most viewed or newest, latest blog post. So what I've done here is I've taken the 4 latest ones that is a little bit more important. So you know when you come to this blog what to prioritize. And the 3 below that is a little bit smaller, you know that you don't have to read if you don't have time. If you have time, go for it. So let's click on a post and ask ourselves, what is the least important thing on this page? Absolutely least important thing. I would say that it's the header, because we already clicked on it because we wanted to read it. And also, how often do we intend to read the header while we are on this page? Once would probably be enough, maybe 2 times. Yet we keep giving it the biggest, loudest font of the whole page. So let's fix that. Now it looks like the subheaders are most important part of the page, so let's change that as well. They might be important, but not that much more important than the content. So now they're the same size, but bold instead. So we don't have to be more dramatic than this if we don't need to. So on the one on the right side, the after, if you will, looks like something that I'm going to read. The content is important. On the left side, we have 4 very bold in-your-face elements that you may keep reading over and over again instead of reading the content. And this is also referred to as interference, like the cat on the laptop. I will say one thing. If you are doing this on the web, to make it more accessible for as many as possible, it's much better to restyle your H1, for instance. If our header is an H1, restyle it. Do not change it to an H3 because it has the size you want. Restyle it so it will be much more easy for the screen readers to understand and keep both hierarchy and context. Okay, let's throw ourselves into the world of accessibility. WebAIM, or Web Accessibility Mind, they do analysis of the top 1 million homepages. They have a lot of interesting data. They are using Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, or WCAG, for the analysis. And that covers a wide range of recommendations for making web content more accessible. It does work for other applications as well, and it's not just for web. And they are using everything from visual, auditory, physical, speech, cognitive, language, learning, and neurological disabilities to make the web a little bit more friendly. 97% of all the web pages, the top 1 million web pages, have WCAG failures. Now, the good thing is that almost 97% of those 97% are within just 6 categories. So if we address that handful of errors, we will significantly improve our accessibility. So let's look at the most common accessibility issue, which is contrast. Over 86% of pages have this issue. So contrast is a way to measure perceived differences in luminance or brightness between two colors. And we use a ratio to express this, ranging from 1:1, which is white on white or black on black, to 21:1, which is black on white or white on black. And as a reference, red is 4 and blue is 8.6. Now, the minimum recommendation for contrast for most of your text is 4.5. And I would say that it's pretty clear why this is a minimal recommendation. And I would recommend that you do not use this. You use the enhanced contrast recommendation instead, which is called AAA instead of AA. And they start at 7:1, which is a little better. The one I use the most is around 15.5 or so, because it's not too bright to be uncomfortable, you know, when you read bright white text on black background and you can still read the text minutes after, but it still punch a lot of contrast. So around, I would say 14.5 and 16 is the sweet spot for me. And there's a lot of tools that can help with contrast, and most developer tools, browser developer tools, and webbing for that matter have a bunch of tools for you. The second most common accessibility issues are images and alternative text. Almost 2/3 of the images of the web are to no use for a large group of people. And on top of that, sometimes we are a little bit lazy and we want a quick fix. So 10% of the images that actually had alternative text, let's call them, they had questionable alt text like image or blank or the file name. And I do get that sometimes we have time restraint and we must live up to a certain requirement set by the higher ups and so on. But by cheating like this, it's just a slap in the face to anyone who actually depends on the alt text. Why pretend that you are accessible only to do this? It doesn't take that much longer to type a helpful descriptive text instead of using graphic. I know technology is getting a lot better, and especially at recognizing what an image depicts and stuff like that. A year ago, this was interpreted as a parrot. Today, it's interpreted as a cat wearing a garment. And it's closer. But even though they might be able to say what the image actually depicts, the context isn't that easy to automatically interpret. So we need to provide an alternative text that represent the content and function of our images. So let's take this image as an example. We can use alternative text in 2 ways. We can put an actual visible text near the image, and we can use the alt attribute of the image element. Every image should have an alt attribute, even if it's empty. So there are 2 things not to do when it comes to alt texts. Don't be redundant or repeat the same information as you have text near the image. So if we already have a descriptive text under the image, put something else in your alt text or leave it empty. Don't include phrases like image of or graphics of by saying image of a white cat, for instance, because the screen readers will read it as image of a white cat. So we don't need that. And 2 things that we should do instead is be accurate in representing both the content and function. In this example, it's just a picture. It doesn't have a function. But it is important for the rest of the content or our story to say that it's festive and sparkly. And be succinct without sacrificing accuracy. A few words up to a short sentences or 2. I don't think it will add value to have a descriptive as detailed as this. It doesn't matter that the pom-poms are red or green. So let's use the festive version instead. The third most common accessibility issues is missing form input labels. Now, we already talked about making forms more usable, so we won't go down that rabbit hole again, but we need to make sure that our code is accessible as well. And we can do that by labeling all the things. And there's great documentation on the WAI page on labeling controls as well. So I promise you to show you a real example of unnecessary steps. So this is a time report system. And I go to the page. It is blurry, so don't adjust your screens. It is blurry to protect the not so innocent. In this page, I log in and I click on the shortcut, go directly to time report. And I get redirected to this page where I have to log in again. Okay, so I log in again and I get to this third page, completely different design. And I need to click on time report again. Okay, so I do that. And guess what? I need to log in. And finally, I get to the report site. Now, I logged in 3 times. And these pages have completely different designs. And we're talking about security. I don't know if I'm still at the same page anymore. This takes about 16 or 17 seconds to get to the actual time report after I click that. And I timed it so many times. Now, if the UI actually took me there, it would have taken, what, 1-2 seconds tops, which means I waste 15 seconds every time I go there. And it doesn't sound like much, but it does add up to 5 minutes per month for one employee in one system. Now, let's say that this is an internal system that I need to use 3 times per day. That's fair, right? It's not too uncommon to use your internal tools 3 times per day. We're a mid-sized company, 200 employees. All of a sudden, it's 600 man-hours wasted per year. So now it's not only about my experience, it's also about companies losing money for absolutely nothing. Well, they do get slightly more frustrated employees, so that's not nothing. If there is one thing that I want you to take away from this presentation, it is that UX and accessibility is not something that should come at the end stages of development as an afterthought. It should not be that feeling of, oh, I need to make this usable for people who have a certain disability. There's different ways we can look at differences in functionality. A parent with a newborn often only have one arm available. A person who has a temporary arm injury also only have one arm available. So it might very well be that you don't expect a lot of amputees to use in your applications, so you don't want to implement that one-handed navigation to begin with. But by excluding the smaller group, we're also excluding the other groups I just showed. And this is also true for visual, auditory, physical, speech, cognitive, language, learning, and neurological differences. So stop looking at it as a disability and start looking at it as a way to include more people. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jessica. I think this was a powerful outcome from the message, and thank you so much for delivering it to us. We have some questions.
Yeah, sure.
Would you like to answer them?
Yeah, if there's time. Otherwise, I will also be in the chat room and answering them as well. So it's up to you. I don't know how we are in time.
We can try and answer to some of them if you would like to.
Mm-hmm.
We have, if there is a back button in the stepper, where should next step and back step be placed in a form?
Oh, yeah, interesting. It depends on the platform. Because if you're using a mobile application, for instance, we already have some standards there. If you're using web, there's different standards. So it actually depends on your application, where you are targeting. Don't you just love the "it depends" answers?
Yes. And that will be the last one because we have our time up. Images, alt versus title, or both. Is there overlap with screen readers?
What can you repeat that?
Images, alt versus title, or both. Is there an overlap?
Actually, I need to check that, so I need to double check that so I don't stand here and make things up. So let me get back to that in the chat room. Is that okay?
Absolutely. Sure.
Perfect.
Okay, well, thank you so much. I think even I learned something from your speech today. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, have a great rest of the conference, you guys. And thank you so much for your time, Jessica. Goodbye.
Bye.